this is Miss Andrea, and today I want to talk about the Georgia Promise Scholarship Act. What that is a new law signed by Governor Brian Kemp that will create up to $6,500 in grant funds for qualifying parents to send their children to private school and supply grant funding for parents who have decided to homeschool their children. I'm sure that makes a lot of homeschoolers happy. And I don't really have a problem with that, although the consensus for the last 20 years, 20 plus years at this point that I have been involved in homeschooling, says that there's a large number of homeschoolers who do not want government money released to homeschoolers, because when you release government money to homeschoolers, you also are giving the government permission to step into your homeschooling and start issuing regulations. So that said, we understand that. We understand that there are people who want this money, and we understand that there are people who don't want this money. As someone who runs a homeschool program, I can definitely see both sides of the coin, because I know that without this money, homeschooling continues to be an activity for the elite. I got to homeschool my kids because of what my husband does for a living, and the fact that he could supply the money and I did not need to have that full-time second job to carry us through. So that thing that annoyed me so much when someone would speak to me about homeschooling and then say must be nice rings super true, because it must be nice. There are a lot of people who cannot homeschool for lack of money. So with that said, this law could be good, but I'm struggling to see the value because they have it set up in a way that it's darn near difficult to procure the funds. Okay, so this big hoorah, they've passed this law. People are calling me about this law. A lot of people are under the impression that they can bring their kids to my homeschool program. I'm sorry, I had nuts. A lot of people think that they can bring their kids to my homeschool program and then leave it up to me to procure the money from the state. And that's not how that works in any way, shape, or form. And this is so misleading, because there's a broadcast where they're interviewing this homeschool family, right? And it says, the family says, we were hesitant to homeschool because it's very demanding and it's a lot. Your kid's education depends on it. True, true, true. Tiffany and Lee Lawrence tell me they've been homeschooling their 6 children for the past 13 years. Tiffany was homeschooled herself as a child, but she was reluctant to take that step with her own family until she and her husband realized there was a big community of local parents just like them. And so they found the value of pooling their resources with similar families, which is great. So that lead-in has nothing to do with how this law acts. So the new law will create up to $6,500 in grant funds for qualifying parents to send their children to private school and supply grant funding for parents who decided to homeschool their children. What this parent, Ashley King, said is, we don't have to pay tuition, but we need somewhere for homeschoolers to meet. And that's the type of service I provide. I provide classes, but I also have a building where homeschoolers could come and meet for a very small fee. So that money could help them, book time in my building to have their homeschool meetings, right? We have to have materials and supplies and all the stuff that comes out of our own personal budget. So, yeah. So they're all for the funding, but they're also saying that that's going to be monitored and it's going to mess with their freedom. So that's Decatur County. Decatur County will probably get to use a lot of that money, but there's so many caveats to this, guys. Okay. What exactly is the Georgia Promise Scholarship Act? So as I said, $6,500 per student per year for eligible education expenses. So you're going to have to keep track of what you spend and report that back, right? Who is eligible to use this money? Unlike some ESA programs in other states like Arizona and Utah, the Georgia Promise Scholarship will not be universally available. However, more than 500,000 students statewide will be eligible to apply. 500,000. Hold. How many public school students in Georgia? So they're saying that roughly a third of children will be eligible, to apply. I still don't believe that. Okay. Because here's the caveat right here. To qualify for, and it's purple, to qualify for a Promise Scholarship, students must meet certain criteria. They must be zoned into the lowest performing 25% of Georgia schools. And there's a map that we're going to visit so that you can see where these schools are. Okay, so they must have been enrolled in such a school for at least 1 year or 2 consecutive years, or be entering kindergarten. So this says that a homeschooler who was always homeschooled can't just jump in and get this money. They have to be fleeing the schools. So homeschoolers who have been homeschooling, who think that you can get this money, it doesn't look like the law is written this way. It specifically says students must have been enrolled in such a horrible school for at least 1 year or be entering kindergarten. Students' parents must have been Georgia residents for at least 1 year, so you can't move in from a different state either. You have to establish residency unless there are active duty military service members stationed in Georgia within the previous year. Priority, because there's so much money, and when the money's gone, the money's gone. Priority will be given to students whose parents earn less than 400% of the federal poverty line, which will be about $120,000 a year for a family of 4. However, currently, this is not a requirement to qualify. Don't want to tell my business, but my family would have never qualified for this money. So you have to be lower middle class at least to qualify for this money. Currently, the Promise Scholarship Program has a funding of 1% of public school funding. If fully funded at this level, it could provide scholarships to over 21,000 students. So they're expecting 500,000 students to apply, and they're expecting to give the money to 21,000 students. And they're giving priority to people at a certain poverty level. That's not poor. 120 isn't poor. But 120, like, you kind of need $200,000 a year to be middle class, comfortably middle class these days. So there has to be a little bit of a struggle there in Georgia. Irritating, right? The Georgia Promise Scholarship Act lays out 7 different categories of educational expenses. So now they're telling you how you can spend this money. Tuition, fees, and required textbooks for I'm sorry, I had a migraine for 3 days. And whenever I have a migraine for the next couple of days, I get very tongue twisted. So let's try that again. The Georgia Promise Scholarship Act lays out 7 different categories of educational expenses. They are tuition, fees, and required textbooks for eligible core courses and eligible CTAE courses at a participating school, accredited community college, good, or post-secondary education institution, or non-public online learning program or course. What do they mean by CTAE? Got it. Tech. Tutoring services provided by an educator certified by the Professional Standards Commission, which means for me to tutor my kids, I would have to go back and get a certification to take advantage of this money. Payment for purchasing a curriculum, including any supplemental materials required. Services from a physician or therapist like occupational, behavioral, physical, or speech language therapy. So those are services you would get in school. Up to $500 a year to a fee for service transportation provider. So you can hire transportation for your student for $500 a year. Fees for the management of account funds. Other expenses are authorized by the Board of Education or the Education Savings Authority, and the majority of the Parent Review Committee authorizes individual education expenses. It's worth pointing out that the bill calls for a Parent Review Committee to help determine what should be counted as qualified education expenses. It sounds like homeschooling in New York, which is a lot of paperwork, y'all. Additionally, students participating in the program will be required to take a national norm reference test or state assessment test, which in Georgia, you have to do this every 3 years. So are they saying you have to take the local test? Because now we can take any test. And are they saying you have to take it more than once every 3 years, which is what homeschoolers normally take it? I'm guessing it's any national normed test, and that you may need to take it yearly to prove that that money is being used and that your child is growing academically. These scholarships are not available this year. I have a student graduating this year and the parent asked me about it. They don't qualify, right? It opens for the 25-26 academic year. However, the scholarship program has a 10-year expiration date ending June 30th, 2035. All the guidelines aren't set. There's still things to figure out. Families who participate in the program will be required to ensure that their child receives an education in reading, grammar, math, social studies, and science. They will also have to agree to not enroll their child in a public school, except for part-time enrollment in a college and career academy, which is allowed. So in our state and across the country, pretty much, you can now take your kids to the public school for like electives and like athletics. And so I guess that's not allowed under this, because the point is you don't trust the public school, so you want this money. If a family is approved, they will receive funds every quarter, which they can use to pay for the child's education expenses. This money is non-taxable and can only be used for educational expenses. So my guess is they'll have to prove that they're still homeschooling every quarter or in private school every quarter. If the money provided by the program is not enough to cover all expenses, the family will have to pay the rest. However, some schools may offer additional scholarships or discounts to help pay the costs. If any money is left over at the end of the school year, up to 50% can be rolled over to the following year. However, if the account is inactive for 2 years, the account will be closed. So once you get the account open, you have to keep it up to date. And families will be able to use the system to direct the money to their schools or service providers, so they can go into the account and have money sent directly to their service providers. What else do you need to know? They can choose to use the scholarship to attend a private school. Georgia, they're saying, according to EdChoice, 79% of Georgia students live within 10 minutes of a private school, and more than 95% live within 20 minutes of a private school. If a school requires a partial tuition payment before the start of school to reserve a space for the student, the Education Savings Authority can make a payment as long as that is no more than $1,000, and that amount will be deducted from the child's first quarterly payment. In the meantime, parents should check out the list of participating schools and providers, familiarize yourself with eligibility requirements, estimate your child's future education expenses, tuition, fees, books, and etc. Stay informed about any updates or announcements and gather any required documentation for you and your children, proof of residency, IDs, and social security numbers. Other school choice options in Georgia for private schools. It provides a tax-exempt scholarship funded by private donations. This currently serves 20,000 students. Georgia also has a voucher program for students with special needs. Does it? Okay, so we'll be back because we need to explore that. The biggest difference between these existing programs and Georgia's Promise Scholarship is that the Promise Scholarship allows families more flexible options for customizing their child's learning. Other public school expansions. The new bill aims to clarify the rules for public school students who wish to make an inter-district transfer, which refers to transferring students between a public school in one district and a public school in another. So if you do want to do public school, however, the public school in your area is not doing what they should do, this bill is going to allow you to have your child transferred to a public school that does meet standards. Interesting. So you can see that this bill is very limited. Like, you can't be already a homeschooler and then apply for this money to keep homeschooling. You have to be a public school parent and apply for this money to start homeschooling. That super sucks. It does. Okay. So, here's the map. Because they said, you have to be in the 25 percentile. Your school has to be in the 25 percentile to qualify. So here's Georgia, and here are all the schools, right? These are all the schools, and they're only talking about 200,000. Well, how much? How many? 2,000? 2,100? Did I read that right? 2,100 scholarships. So what is that? Like 10 scholarships per school? Because these are all the schools that are 25%. Okay. I'm zooming into my neck of the woods. I'm kind of Atlanta proper. So if we look at Atlanta proper, this is where I live. Zoom in more to where I live. And there's a few schools there. Here's the thing. This is not where I raised my kids, and this is not where I run my homeschool program. I'm so bad at maps. Where is it? Where is it? 85 Durville Sugarloaf Mills. Haha. This is where I raised my kids. The only school that qualifies is this Georgia Intervention Education, which is where you send kids who've been expelled, and this one elementary school, which I'm surprised because I've seen the elementary school and it looks beautiful. This is actually right by my kid's house. So if my kids are still living where they are and have children, this school would give them an opt-out. But in all of Gwinnett and all of Lawrenceville proper, oh, I'm not surprised about that one. There's only a small amount of schools that actually qualify. So I feel like this is only going to work for people who are like very city, because those are the schools that don't work. Because the schools in Gwinnett, well, the one high school in Gwinnett that falls in the 25 percentile is a school for kids who are expelled. So it's not a neighborhood school, so it doesn't count. So, like, this bill is a lot of talk and not a whole lot of action. I'd love to hear your thoughts, your ideas about this. What should be different? Should we have this at all? Talk back in the comments and let's keep this conversation going. Till next time.